As you probably know, I am a member of RMT, and as you also know, or you might know, we've got our next strike on the 15th of this month. I think it's important for people to understand that, you know, the reason why we're going on strike is down to the fact that the company and also the government want to meddle with our pensions. It's also down to the fact that there's impending, or they want to cut certain positions at certain stations. They want to cut 600 jobs, and also our terms and conditions. And when you think about, you know, the job aspect, it's safe to say that, you know, cutting staff from certain stations, like some of the biggest stations on the Combine, that is the London Underground, can cause a major effect, not just on staff, but also customers as well. If you don't have the right amount of staff to operate a station, then you either close it or you get extra staff. If you're going to cut numbers, then it will cause a major effect, because if a station needs to be evacuated and you don't have the sufficient number of staff at a station and there's a fire, then we're looking at lawsuits potentially. You know, with our pensions, you know, as we get older, you know, we seem to be getting poorer. So therefore, as we're getting older and we're looking to retire, you know, everybody wants to have a certain amount of money so that they can live and enjoy their retirement. And our pensions cut, and it means that we get less money in our retirement, and nobody wants that. And it's also safe to say that, you know, we work shifts as well, and that can cause a major effect on the body. If you're doing late and then you're going into earlys and into like nights, you know, the effect that you can have on your sleep pattern, your eating pattern, and your life in general, then it is an issue. The other issue that we have as well is that, you know, as a lone worker and as a woman, I don't particularly like nights anyway. So if I'm on my own, there are certain things that I won't do. And that is purely down to me thinking about my safety. So, you know, when you take all of that into consideration, when you take the attack on, you know, working class people, because that is what this government is doing. They're not doing it to their rich friends. It is always the working class. It is constantly the working class who are having to pay for the mistakes that the ruling class made. Then it's no wonder we're on strike. It's no wonder the teachers are on strike. They're not being paid well enough. And it's not about money for them. It's also about their well-being. You've got NHS members on staff. They've got a pay rise of about 1% or something ridiculous like that, but yet they're having to go to food banks in order to supplement what they cannot buy. They're also having to work extra jobs in order to supplement the money that they're not getting for what they're doing as their main job. You've got the post office, they're always on strike. You know, they're also facing job cuts as well. So all of these aspects, all of these jobs, they are mainly working class people, and it is us that constantly are having to face the brunt of these cuts. And the more cuts that they implement, the more we strike, the more they don't listen, then we're going to have to go on strike. And that includes rail, post office, shop workers, NHS, barristers as well. You know, people think that barristers are getting a high wage, but they're not, to my surprise. So yeah, so you know, the working class have to keep fighting, and I think it's, you know, high time that everybody who's on strike, we all need to strike at the same time, and we all need to strike in solidarity, because it is every single one of us that is being hit. And it's down to this ruling class that is constantly, you know, attacking us for their mistakes. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for that, Emily. Some really important words there, and I hope you could hear the applause you were getting in the room. Solidarity to you. I see you're at work right now. Good luck with the strike. We'll be there to support. Wonderful, thank you. Right, I'm now going to bring in our next speaker, who is the lovely Lucy Cox, who is a teacher and a member of the NEU.
Interesting listening to Ebony, because she picked up on all the things I was going to say. So actually there's some huge similarities between the reasons why they're going on strike, why we're going on strike, why lecturers are on strike, why barristers are even having to walk out. And I think it's been, but I don't think they're things that are they'll be familiar to us. I don't think they're familiar to the Tories, for instance, because when we walked out on the 1st of February, it sort of seemed to come to as a shock to a lot of people, just how well supported the strike was, how angry it was, the number of people that came out on the demonstration in central London, and kind of the mood around it. You know, the police had estimated there was going to be like, I don't know, 15,000 people there or something, and it was much nearer to 50,000. It was a much bigger event than they'd expected. And I think the reason why that it did explode in that way was because actually what led to people walking out and led to the strike being as strong as it has been, certainly in my experience, is about the kind of process of the things that have happened, not just over the last 12 years, because, you know, under New Labour, I've been teaching 22 years now, so I remember teaching under New Labour, and it was no paradise, right? But it's got a lot worse in the last 12 years. You know, the way that the neoliberalism seeps into schools and into the very relationships between the teachers and the young people. You know, we've been talking earlier about the protests over uniform. Actually, you know, the amount of time that teachers spend policing children's bodies, you know, enforcing zero tolerance behaviour policies, things like that actually put barriers between them, that break the connection between, you know, the relationship that you need in order for people to learn. Actually, we learn through relationships with each other. We don't learn by imposing, you know, a knowledge curriculum, as we're told by the ideologues of the right on the young people that we teach. I mean, I teach in a nursery school, right? So it's quite different. You know, we don't have a zero tolerance behaviour policy, for instance, because I wrote the behaviour policy. So we've got a connection policy. We've got one that talks about attachment. We've got one that actually recognises the importance of relationship, and that's something that, you know, I was happy to go to the governors and argue for. But that's unusual, and in most schools that's very different. Just up the road from me in the same borough is Michaela School, which is the strictest school. You know, and lots of kids I taught in primary school have gone on to Michaela, where they're in a school that actually polices the way that they sit, the way that they walk, you know, that they don't have any space whatsoever that's their own. There's no playground, there's no common room, there's nowhere where they can just chill out and chat, right? They're not allowed to speak to each other. I was going to work the other morning, right, and I walked past 3 kids in Michaela uniform, and they were standing, you know, this is like, it's 7:30 in the morning, right? They were going into the tube station. One of their teachers was coming through as well, because obviously the teachers live in the community too, and they were actually having a go at them in the tube station, in the freaking street, right? You know what I mean? Because there's like this constant antagonism between the kids and the students, and that's what, between the teachers and the students, and that's what that school and that model of schooling is built on. And actually, I think for most of us, that we didn't come into teaching for any of that shit. We came into teaching actually because we like kids, we like young people. We want to make, you know, we actually know that they're the future of society. And we actually want to see some kind of liberation for them and for ourselves, and that those relationships that we can build between us are actually what matters to us and what make our jobs worth doing. And those have been under attack. Yes, pay is important. I'm not going to deny that. My pay has been, you know, gradually eroded over the years. I've done more to gain skills. You know, so I've got a Senko qualification, all the rest of it. But actually, all the time I've been gaining skills and gaining experience and qualifications, actually my wages have gone down at the same time. You know, so to the point where, just like everybody else, you know, I haven't been able to have the heating on, and you can probably hear that my asthma is actually really playing up because it's so cold in my flat at home. You know, that's nothing compared to the support staff, right? I'm not going to, you know, claim poverty compared to, you know, I actually was on a WhatsApp conversation with one of the nursery nurses that I work with last night. She was WhatsApping me, talking about actually she hopes her kids don't finish their dinner because that's the only way she can eat in the evenings. You know, she can't afford to buy enough food for herself, and that's common throughout, you know, it's with our support staff throughout the schools. So actually that's why anger exploded, right? The other reason, and I have to say this because I'm a Senko, is actually the absolute criminality of the way that kids with special educational needs are being treated in school. And I have to say that because it is awful, you know, and actually my school's actually stopped taking kids with SEND because we just haven't got the funding to be able to support them anymore. We're supposedly a specialist, you know, 2 specialist schools. Absolutely criminal how those kids are being treated. You know, kids who already suffered the most from COVID and everything. So that explosion of anger was really impressive. It was really good. We had that again a month later, you know, on the 2nd, 2 days ago. you know, it was great, right? My school, all women workers. We only have one man working in our school. He's the caretaker, and he also supports us. But all women workers out on the streets, stopping traffic. Actually, really proud because they stopped a delivery coming into the school. You know, it was a wonderful day. But we can, you know, and around the WhatsApp group and the conversations that we're having between us go much bigger than talking about why we're on strike. We're talking about pedagogy. We're talking about what, you know, our visions of education. It's really, really raised people's eyes up to feel much safer to talk about the things they want, you know, that they're interested in. We set up a side group as well, an anti-racist group in our school, because actually we're fed up of seeing the police coming in and using our little kids as, you know, as like a kind of cover for the fact that they treat the rest of the community like shit. So we're actually going, you know, we're going to our governors to ask them, to say, not ask them actually, we're going to tell them we're not going to have the police in our school anymore. But there are really important questions that we also need to discuss, and that's around the issue of escalation. So on the 15th, we're going to be coming out. 15th of March is going to be our next strike day, and we'll be out with Ebony and the rest of the RMT. We'll be out with Aslef in the tubes. And we'll be out on the 16th as well. But actually, I think, you know, inside schools and around, you know, around the whole question, we need to be talking about whether or not we can keep doing these 1 and 2 day things. One, can we afford to do that? Actually, because we need to win we need to win big, and we need to do it quickly. And two, because actually, unless we go for it, we are not going to be able to actually fight for our vision of pedagogy and our vision of schools and the future that we want for our young people if we don't win. And if we don't escalate, we won't win. And I think it's really important that we're that blunt and we're saying that to people. So I think that's kind of the next thing we want to say. But actually, you know, being on strike has been liberatory, exciting, exhausting, and really wonderful. And, you know, I hope if you're not around in a school or around a school, you'll come and visit one of the picket lines on the 15th, please.
Thank you so much for that, Lucy. I was on strike on Thursday for the first time. So onwards and upwards to the next one. Okay, I'm now going to bring in Anne Alexandra from the UCU.
Thanks very much, and it's great to follow on from Lucy and Ebony. I've also been involved in a lot of strike days this year and in previous years as a member of the UCU. I work at the University of Cambridge, where I'm a researcher. But I actually want to talk about a slightly bigger topic. It follows on very much from the kind of sense of liberation and potential that Lucy was talking about in terms of the strikes on the 1st of February and the 2nd of March, but actually draws a bigger picture about revolution. What does revolution feel like? And at one level, when you talk about revolution, you often think about it, these massive set of extraordinary events of people storming the Bastille, of the Winter Palace in 1917, of the scenes that people may have seen from Sri Lanka, of the people jumping into the president's swimming pool, which was absolutely brilliant, of Tahrir Square in Egypt in 2011, of that young woman, Alice Sola, outside the headquarters of the military in Sudan, being, acclaimed by tens of thousands of people. And so what's the link between what goes on in Lucy's nursery school and a revolution? Well, actually they are connected in a very deep way. That those extraordinary events and those extraordinary processes are made by ordinary people who do extraordinary things because they open up the possibility that is in all of us to change ourselves and change the world at the same time. So I want to talk a bit about some of the ordinary things that people do in revolutions. They organise picket lines, they organise strikes, they take over their workplaces. And we had a brilliant example actually that Liz was talking about in the previous session about how in her workplace at Camden Council, not in a revolution, just in an everyday workplace, they took over the workplace to kick back at a manager who wanted to dictate what the workers would wear at work. So they all came in wearing t-shirts and jeans and leggings with political slogans on and did a work-in that particular part of the office. And it was a very small kind of step towards liberation, but it was a step that was taken inside the workplace, and it was incredibly powerful. In revolutions, people do that at scale. Millions of people do that. Millions of people get the sense that what they can do is get into that space at the point of production, inside the process of accumulation of capital, that it disrupts the machinery and starts to turn it into something else. Some of the most inspiring conversations that I had in many years of kind of talking to people in countries as diverse as Syria, as Egypt, as from Sudan and from Iran have been about what people have managed to do in their workplaces in the context of revolutions. So, for example, I visited Egypt quite a lot in 2011 to 2012. I interviewed hospital workers in a hospital in Cairo, which had been taken over by the workforce. This was in the midst of the revolutionary events that had unfolded. All the pictures that people saw of Tahrir Square, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people on the streets. But actually what those workers had done is they had massively shifted what it meant to be at work from inside. So, for example, the nurses, for the first time, had a stake in what happened in terms of the patient care that they were delivering. They said they had never felt, the way that they did about what went on in the workplace because they were in control of it. They had thrown the director out of the hospital and elected a new one. They had, when the Ministry of Health had phoned up and said, no, you can't do that. No, actually, sorry, you can't just throw out the director and elect a new one. Then the person who was on the phone to him, who was speaking on behalf of the kind of workplace-based union council that was running the hospital, said, well, actually, the security guards are in the union with us, and they're not going to let him back in the building. So if you want the hospital to continue functioning, you'd better let us run it our way. And in fact, in that context, because there were so many people taking that kind of action, they had to give into it. And that kind of shifting of control inside the workplace is something that actually opens up a whole, possibility of liberation on a different scale. And it's something that every revolution that involves millions of people taking action on their own behalf starts to put those kinds of questions. So on the 15th of March, as other people have said, there will be people from a whole range of different unions and sectors will be out. That will start to raise questions about how society runs. I remember talking to Algerian activists a few years ago. There were massive protests and strikes across Algeria from 2019 to 2020. Towards the end of 2019, in one of the areas of Algeria, in the Kabylia region, in the town of Béjaïa, there was basically a kind of, as a general strike against the authoritarian regime that was there. And I talked to some of the activists who helped to organise that, and they described how instead of striking was obviously about disruption, striking is about stopping stuff, striking is about saying we were going to protest, we're going to not do our jobs. But they started to have to take decisions about, for example, would there be bread for people to get at the bakeries? So they arranged that the bakeries would be partially open for an hour in the morning. Would there be emergency care for those who needed it? Yes, they took decisions about whether pharmacies would be allowed to open for a few hours. They took decisions about the transport. Transport was arranged so that people could come to the protest in the centre of Béjaïa from the outlying villages. In other words, they started to take steps and take decisions about how society should be run. They started to creep over from that phase of disruption, of stopping the world, to making the world work on our terms. And that's why at the heart of every revolution that opens up this possibility of liberation, this possibility of transformation, the working class has to be at the heart of that. Whether it's in Britain, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Iran. If you look at the Sudanese revolution, the transformation that took place in the revolutionary process in Sudan in 2019, it wasn't actually at the moment when you had just the big street protests or the big sit-ins that brought hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets. It was actually the moment when workers got involved in an organised way. There were several general strikes in the beginning halfway through 2019, on the 28th and 29th of May, for example. And in the context of Sudan, you're talking not just about nasty Tory governments, who might, yes, they do evil stuff to us, but they don't tend to come around and shoot us on picket lines. In Sudan, the people who were going on strike there were facing, the prospect of militias that had organised the genocide in Darfur. The head of that militia, the Rapid Support Forces, stood up and said, if you go on strike, I'll come after you. I will send the militia to come and shoot and kill you. A few days later, I saw pictures of women workers in the financial services industry, of teachers, of airport workers going into the streets with signs saying, here I am, come and get me. And because they were out in their millions, they were absolutely able to do that. The port shut down, the airport shut down, the banks shut down. There was a unity across the whole scope of the working class, and that actually made a fundamental difference to the outcome of that process. It started to open up a process whereby people began to think in Sudan about very different ways of running society. Now, there are compromises that take place. In the Sudanese case, civilian politicians came in and negotiated a very shoddy deal with the military. So there is still ongoing protests, including ongoing forms of organisation through the resistance committees, which are still mobilising people and organising solidarity with strikes. But it shows ability. And I think really what we do is that the conditions that give rise to this potential for liberation are ones that we make ourselves, and it's in some of the very everyday things that we do when we argue in our workplaces, in our neighbourhoods, to do the kinds of things that Lucy was talking about coordinating strikes, about escalating the strikes, about not forgetting the questions of liberation and taking on oppression. Because the other thing that I would say that is a huge lesson I would say I've learned from observing and in some cases, participating in revolutionary movements in many different contexts, is that we cannot forget these questions that are used to divide us. There is no way that we can simply talk about the economics of the amount in our pay packets and forget about the fight for liberation from sexism, for liberation from racism, for standing up against transphobia. All of those things will come back to bite us if we allow the ruling class to weaponize those things, which is why actually the struggle for liberation is inseparable from the question of revolution. And I think that this is events like this are crucial and part of the struggle for a better society. I hope I will see everyone on the streets and on the picket lines on the 15th of March, but I hope also that you'll consider joining us in the fight for revolution and socialism.
So I'm sure you're all aware, or that you've seen, that the far right is now on the rise. It's quite concerning, the numbers that they've managed to mobilise, and recently seeing the targeting of refugee hotels, in setting police vans on fire, and also going for drag queen story hours. But this isn't coming from, it's not a random occurrence. They're not just deciding to pop up out of nowhere. This confidence that they've got now has come from number one, the far-right presence across Europe. So different governments in Europe, like Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy in Italy, and Marine Le Pen, the popularity of her party in France as well. We're seeing a rise of fascist ideas in Europe, and also in this country, the government who have called refugees and migrants invaders and have been attacking trans rights. And we have people like Sahela Braverman talking about how it's her dream to see a flight taking off to Rwanda, like this constant pushing of this division between different groups of people. And of course, these ideas have to be countered, and there have been really great mobilizations against the far right when they've appeared. We've seen thousands of people coming to fight back against them, as of course we need to do, people coming together, different groups of people coming together. For example, with the drag time story hours, LGBT activists as well as anti-racist activists coming together to fight against the far right, to fight against these Nazis. And of course, it's important to mention how great these confrontations are. I don't want to downplay how important it is that we do react to things when they happen, because of course we can't just sit back and let them happen. But this is also not enough. We need to build a movement that can react to these things not only when they happen, but to prevent them from happening in the first place, and to build anti-racism a consciousness of anti-racism within society. We need to build anti-racism at our workplaces, build anti-racism on campus for those of us in the room that are students, and for those of us who are members of unions, to build anti-racism in our unions as well. The picket lines on the 15th of February, there's got to be a strong message of anti-racism there as well, you know, that we're not going to stand for this, we're not going to just sit down and let it happen, but we see the government who are attacking workers' rights, making conditions way worse for people, and of course, while there's all this crisis happening, the crisis of capitalism, what the government does to distract us from this, to distract us from their failures and from the faults of this system, is to divide us, to make us think that refugees and migrants are the reasons why we're struggling now with this cost of living crisis and struggling to get housing, and making us think that LGBT people, that trans people are also problems for us. So yeah, we've got to have this, we've got to be against the government and their ideas. But not only should we be building this march, we've got to have build the revolutionaries on the ground, so that we can not only respond to issues like anti-racism, but other issues, and as a group come together to fight for liberation. So.
Thank you so much. Just before I move on to the next speaker, you will see that there are some lovely posters in front of you. If you could all hold those up, we're going to take a selfie to promote. Do that social media thing, you know? Stand up, yes. On your feet, come on. We're revolutionaries.
And I think the day has come in the context of the last few years where we've actually seen an explosion of new movements challenging women's oppression. You think about the Me Too movement exposing the industrial levels of harassment in society, the women's marches and protests that exploded against Trump and Bolsonaro, or the recent mobilisations for abortion rights and reproductive rights in America and elsewhere. Or what about those mass demos that erupted after the horrific murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer, and the continual revelations actually about institutional sexism, misogyny in the police. And we've heard not only protesting in the streets, but women central to the strikes at the moment, fighting for better pay, better conditions against the vicious Tory government. And I think it's right, I don't know where I am, when you're talking about women as well, not only striking, but being at the forefront of revolution. The Mahala textile workers in Egypt, I remember, who were key to toppling the dictator Mubarak back in 2011. The Sudanese women who've been leading the charge, and in Iran too. And I don't really think it's a surprise that women are at the forefront of these struggles, really, or at the forefront of revolution. People have heard of the Russian revolutionary Lenin. He described revolutions as the festivals of the oppressed, times when the most put upon in society are at the forefront of resisting. When all that anger and rage that we feel, probably often pent up inside us, can be expressed, but actually crucially challenging those problems in society. Because that's what revolution is about. Challenging the very structures in society and transforming it in ourselves. And I think that idea of change is really important, because I think a theme from today has been how sexist ideas don't just come out of men's heads. Babies are not born with a predisposition to sexism. We don't see sexism as somehow natural. We think it is a consequence of how society is organised. Our ideas are shaped by the world that we're in, and having an understanding of how women's oppression is structured into the world of capitalism. Again, we talked a lot about the role of the family and what a key role it plays for those at the top of society. That's why they fight so hard to reinforce it all the time, because it plays such a key role economically, but also ideologically as well. And that it's structured into society through policy, through ideology, through financial incentives. And it's from that setup that all those ideas of what women should be come about, even if we don't live in a traditional family, like lots of us don't, because that's what's held up and shaped and pushed in that way. All those ideas that we have to be caring, nurturing, attractive to find a partner so we can have children and all that flow from it. And that's entwined with capitalism as this system run on profit, everything turned into a commodity, something to be bought and sold. even every aspect of our lives, from our clothes, our hair, our bodies, even sex, as we've been talking about, turned into something that can be bought and sold, distorting all our relationships in that way. And I think the conclusion here is, if we're saying women's oppression is rooted in class society, that it takes a particular form under capitalism, then the logical conclusion must be we have to get rid of that system. And that's why I think it's really important we talk about a collective response, because we experience these things as individuals, but our strength is when we fight and resist together. And I think when we talk about resistance, we mean going beyond just a gender war, we mean fighting as a class, if you like. And I think we should be clear. Change comes through struggle. Anything we've ever won has come through people fighting, whether that's winning the vote, maternity leave, better pay, whatever it is, collectively organising. And Isabel, in the first session, talked about International Women's Day coming up on Wednesday. And actually, that this was organised first back in 1911 by socialist women. I mean, we have to remember the origins, because we're going to be caught up in all the corporatisation and, I don't know, the flowers that we're going to be given as women or whatever else, money made from it. But actually, it was a day of struggle. It was a day to remember the struggle of women workers in New York in the needle sweatshops who were fighting for better pay and the vote and trade union rights. And it's also worth saying, it was called International Working Women's Day, because those socialist women, over 100 years ago, they actually had the same sort of women we have. The Priti Patels, the Suella Bravermans, the Liz Trusses, all those women who sometimes even say, I'm a feminist, this is what a feminist looks like, but actually are the ones often attacking us. They were saying there's some different interests here. Of course, they're experiencing sexism, but they have no interest in challenging that system and where it comes from. They perpetuate it, and they actually make it worse for a lot of other women. But I also bet that those socialist women that proposed International Working Women's Day over 100 years ago, they'd be a bit shocked that we are still fighting a whole load of battles today. Of course, we've made gains. The world for women does look different to perhaps 2 or 3 generations ago. We do have some more choices. People have fought for those things. But actually, the way capitalism works is it tries to roll back those changes. That's why we're seeing the attacks on reproductive rights and abortion at the moment, or even just on our pay as well. And that's why we're talking about, yes, how do we fight now, but how do we link it to that bigger change of revolution, getting rid of the system completely in that way. And I think then is thinking about how we talk about going beyond the gender fight, because capitalism as a system is built on the exploitation of all workers, women and men. And we're about how do you demolish that class division as well as exploitation and inequality. And it's quite a task. Women's oppression, these things have existed for quite a while, haven't always existed, but they've been around for a while. And I think what we've talked about today, though, shows how this challenge of how we fight women's oppression and fight against the system isn't separate from the strikes and struggles today. And to be honest, I think it's brilliant when you hear from women workers who are on strike, because actually it shows we're not just victims of our oppression. We're class fighters, and when we fight collectively, we have a potential power as part of a wider working class. And that's what women are. We're not somehow separate as another category to the working class in Britain. We're half the workforce. We're very much part of it, as we are globally. And that's why, if you think about it, it's in the interest of the whole working class to be united, because we're stronger when we fight together. Because, of course, the capitalists like to divide and rule. We know how they use racism to divide us, to scapegoat. They do it in other ways. They like to see men and women set against each other. Now, they're even trying to set women against trans women. Well, I'll just be honest about saying this here. We, in the SWP, we think trans women are women. We don't see a contradiction between fighting for trans rights and women's rights. We're all part of that same practice. And I think the point is that all working class people are exploited when they're at work. So whatever our different identities that we may have in that way, actually, someone at the top is making profit off all of our backs. It gives us an actual material, objective basis for unity that we can fight together. And I think as well, being working class isn't just about being downtrodden or a victim, because class is a potential source of power. Because if you think about it, it's working class women alongside men who do all the work. Grow the food, drive the buses, teach the children, drive the trains like Ebony was talking about, build the homes, nursing people back to health, and are making those profits that drive the system forward. And that's why strikes are important, Because when you go on strike, nothing happens. The profits don't get made for those people at the top. It shows that potential power to hit back. And I think revolution puts on the agenda the possibility of much bigger change. Not just a few tweaks, but the complete transformation of society. Getting rid of capitalism, but uprooting those institutions, uprooting the police. I mean, my God, who doesn't want to do that? And the misogyny and racism, getting rid of it. The laws that benefit the rich and hit us in that way, and criminalise us. All those are the right-wing media and whatever else. Getting rid of a system that commodifies us and losing our bodies. And I think it's not just about what we're against. I think it's about what we're for as well. Fighting for a different society. And to be honest, I think Anne gave a complete, really brilliant vision of how things can be run differently by people when they start running things directly themselves and have some control over it. It's actually, as you put it, us, ordinary so-called people, so-called ordinary people, directly having a say in how society is run, making decisions about how workplaces run, how resources are used, about what we need, not about enriching those at the top. And as I say, that sort of change is not going to come through Parliament. That's why we're talking about revolution, not in the abstract, but very much in the ways coming out of the struggles on the mass scale that we see today that we've got glimpses of. And there's one last thing to say as well. Marx said revolution is necessary for another reason, to throw off what he called the muck of ages. And by the muck of ages, he meant those nasty, divisive, backward ideas that are pumped out from the top to divide us, the sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, that some people can end up buying into. And I think the process of struggle can be transformative. It can lead to our ideas changing. You think about women who are involved in strikes and struggles and revolution. To be honest, when they're playing a leading role in it, it challenged all of the stereotypes that can exist of how people see us, even how we see ourselves. I mean, I just remember the footage from places like Sudan and Iran, actually, where women been leading the way, that brilliant image of the woman on the podium speaking to the crowd in Sudan, you might remember it. To be honest, it challenges both the sexist and racist stereotypes that exist about women, but also about Muslim women in particular, that somehow they're more meek and submissive. I think all these ideas can begin to be challenged through that process. Now look, nothing is automatic here. It's not just that you go on strike once, you stand on the picket line, and the really annoying guy at work, who sometimes is a bit sexist to you, just changes in that one instance. And all the sexist ideas just melt away. There will be arguments. We have to take them up. We have to be the best fighters, actually, confronting those ideas and challenging them and why they're divisive. As socialists, we have to be at the forefront of challenging sexist ideas. But I think the point is, when people are involved in struggle, you feel part of something much bigger and collective and seeking to gain real control. And I just think of the picket lines that I visited in the last few weeks. You know, you go to the hospitals and there's hundreds of people freed up from the trauma of working with the pandemic on the picket line, singing and dancing together. I think I saw you, Lucy, dressed up as an interesting character on your picket line, a mouse, on World Cup Day with other teachers, feeling a bit more liberated about how we're seen in society in that way. And I think that opens up, like when we're fighting together in new creative ways, the possibilities of relating to each other in different ways and how we see ourselves as well, opens up that possibility of bigger change. So our vision for liberation, hopefully you got it out of today, is for a different world, free of exploitation and oppression, where all of us can explore our real, true potential in every sphere of life, whether we're at work, in our leisure, in our relationships, in sexual freedom. And I don't think that is just a dream. It's not just about us dreaming for a different world. It's connected to the struggles today and about organising those and fighting for these ideas. Organising to ensure the strikes go forward and win against their side. We'll all benefit from that. The 15th of March is going to be a massive day of action, as people have said. Organising to challenge the racist attacks and the racism being dripped down from the top of the Tory party, all being on the streets on the 18th of March for the Resist demonstration. Organising to challenge the attacks on our rights, defending the right to choose, and fighting against being seen as just sexual objects, all those things. But linking those fights together through their root cause of capitalism and linking it to the idea of how we challenge that whole system. And if you agree with us and have enjoyed today, we would like to ask you to be a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, because their side is quite organised. We want to be organised too and have the strongest number of socialist revolutionists intervening in the struggles so that our side can go forward and win, uproot sexism and exploitation at the heart of capitalism.